for probably the better part of my life, I would define myself as being just a little bit rebellious. Never in the kind of in your face, I'm going to defy all authority and shake my fist or anything like that. More of the subtle, you could tell me what to do and I'll do it, but I'm going to do it my way. Or, when your back is turned, I'm going to make a face at you kind of rebellion. Or whisper things about you underneath my breath. That kind of rebellion, that sort of small stuff. It was never anything big, but just kind of little things. As a kid, specifically, the sort of thing that I rebelled against, if I was going to stage a rebellion, if you told me to do something, you needed to be specific. For instance, there would be times when I would ask my mom if I could have a pudding cup for a snack. And she'd say, no, you can't have a pudding cup, you don't need one. So I wouldn't get the pudding cup, but she never said anything about the Little Debbie snack cakes. Or, if a teacher told me to get something done a certain way, I'd do it, but I'd do it my way instead. Oftentimes it ended up being harder than the way the teacher told me to do it, so, Mr. Keck might remember some of that, so. But, during my brief time as a cashier at Walmart, and I mean a very brief time, I think 3 shifts, that was about it. I didn't get fired, I quit, it's fine. But, my manager might tell me something like, hey, don't lean up against the cash register just because we're slow. Okay, I won't, but you didn't say anything about the little platform next to the credit card machine where customers would write their checks. I was going to find some way to rebel against whatever you wanted me to do. But now that I'm older, I'm realizing that this sort of rebelliousness was actually probably really annoying to the people who were in charge of me. And I've made that realization because I have 2 daughters that do the same thing. It's never anything big. I mean, it's usually just kind of the small things that kind of pile up my level of annoyed with my children. I'll tell them to do something like pick their toys up off the spare bedroom in our house, and they'll just put them on the floor of their bedroom. Didn't quite get what my meaning was there. Or I'll tell them to do something as simple as, hey, go take your laundry and put it in your room. Obviously, the implication is go put your laundry away, but they'll take that to mean take the laundry, set it on their beds, don't put it away, leave it on their beds, and then go to bed with the laundry still on their beds. I don't know how you sleep like that, but apparently Robin doesn't have a problem with that. Anyway, they're not in here, it's fine. But the one that is most consistent with my daughters and their little phase of rebellion is actually the same thing that it was with me, the most common thing that I did, and it was, of course, the snack thing. I mean, I came by this body shape very honestly. The other day, Adrian asked me at about 5 o'clock, Dad, can I have some Cheez-Its for a snack? It's 5 o'clock. I mean, we have dinner about 6 almost every night, so no, you can't have Cheez-Its. And then I kind of went off into the garage to go take care of a small chore, and I wasn't gone for maybe 3 minutes, and I came back in, and Adrienne was very much like her father eating a Little Debbie snack cake. And when I just gave her this look, she said, well, you didn't say I couldn't have one of these. Now, you might be sitting there and you might logically be thinking, well, if you don't want your child to eat the Little Debbie snack cakes, then don't buy the Little Debbie snack cakes. And to that I would say, shut up. Sometimes Daddy needs a treat too. But it's just this little sort of thing, and I'm getting more concerned the older my daughters get, because I know that for myself, as I got older, that little rebellious streak of mine, it didn't get any, well, let's be honest, it hasn't gotten any better as I've gotten older. It's just got a little different. Instead of, you didn't tell me that, it's become, well, there's no sign that says I can't, or there's no rule that's written that says I can't. For instance, right now at Johnson University, there is a rule in the men's dormitories to not have airsoft BB gun fights in the hallway. If you don't know what an airsoft BB gun is, it's basically a low-velocity BB gun. So when the BB hits you, it'll sting, but it'll fade pretty quickly, and if you cry about it, you're just a wimp. But those little BB guns, they are just powerful enough to create little tiny holes in the drywall of the men's dormitory on the south wing and the first floor. So now there's a rule. There's also a rule of no bullwhips, but that wasn't my fault. Anyway, now you're all really curious, and you're going to stay that way. But It's not like I'm the only one of us in this room to ever stage my little mini rebellions. I'm guessing everybody who's here or watching us online right now, we've all had our own little mini rebellious phases, things where we just kind of do things that we know we're not supposed to do, or maybe do things that we think we ought not to do, just kind of these things that we know we shouldn't be doing. Sometimes we do these things because we don't really like the person in charge of us. Maybe we don't like a teacher or a certain boss or a manager or somebody in our lives we just don't like, so we stage our little mini rebellion against them. Maybe sometimes it's because we just think that the rule that's in place there is not fair, or it's stupid, or we don't like it. Sometimes maybe we just stage our little mini rebellions because, let's be honest, it's kind of fun, right? It makes a good story usually. For instance, the bullwhip story. My goodness, no, we're not going there. Anyway, but, you guys have your own mini rebellious nature. I have mine as well. But that kind of makes sense for us because the culture that we live in, the culture that we kind of have all been a part of, we are a nation founded on rebellion. Right? We know our U.S. history. We know that we started a rebellion against all of Great Britain because we deemed them to be unfair and not the right leadership for us. So we rebelled against them, and because of that, it's part of our very nature. We challenge authority. We question rules. We look for ways to rebel against the things that are in our lives. We look fondly on rebellious figures that strike a chord with us. We have these different people all throughout pop culture, throughout generations, of people who've rebelled against them. And when we're young especially, we looked up to those people. We wanted to emulate them as much as we could. We wanted to idolize them even. All of us wish we could be James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. Whenever he's told, or whenever he's asked, what is it you're rebelling against? He responds, what do you got? We like rebels. We want to be rebels, particularly in our youth. We want to just rebel against whatever authority is in place in front of us. And yet, a lot of the time, as we get older, we start to understand why some of those rules were put in place. We start to see why things were the way that they were. Suddenly that unfair rule that our parents had for us, or maybe the school had for us, all of a sudden it makes perfect sense. We understand that a lot of the rules that are in our lives are placed there for our safety. They're placed there so we don't get hurt, so that we don't deal with pain and misery and heartache, and sometimes even broken relationships. Suddenly the rebel is no longer somebody we want to be like, it's somebody we want to instruct, somebody we want to teach, somebody we want to sit down and explain why these rules are in place. We try our hardest as parents or maybe grandparents to teach our kids why those rules are in place, to show them that it's there because we love you. But we know that they're going to face their own rebellious nature, that they're going to do things that they want, that they're going to have to learn those lessons themselves as they grow older. But here's the thing about rebellion, and here's the thing about rebellious nature, is that all of it really begins when we start to question the authority that's put in place of us. We all kind of reach a certain point in our lives where we begin to wonder, why is this the way that it is? Why is this rule there? Does it really matter that that's there? We question the authority that's placed in front of us. It all starts when that question first gets asked in our minds. And it's been that way since the very beginning. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 today. So if you got your Bible or a Bible app, meet me there. We're going to get there eventually, but as you're getting there, I want to remind you of where it is that we have been so far. So we've been talking about this particular narrative for the last couple of weeks. And when God had finished creating everything, he decided that there was one more thing that his world needed, the one thing that it needed in order for it to be perfect. And so God decided to create man. And unlike everything else that he had created, God decided to do this one in a very personal fashion. Everything else he spoke and it was made, but when it came to the creation of man, God gathered together the dust, he shaped it, he molded it, and we talked about this, we broke this down, and it's just a beautiful moment where God breathed life into this new creation. And it was very good. Everything about God's creation was perfect. For a little while, that is. See, as God watched the man, and as he began to see him interacting with the world around him, God began to make a realization, and that's that man is alone, and that it was not good that man was alone. So God, we talked about last week, tried to come up with a different solution. He brought all the different animals, had the man name all the animals, and tried to find a companion in the midst of all of them, but none of them were perfect. So God developed another plan where he took a rib from the guy and he shaped and formed woman. And when man, I still love this moment. I know I talked about it last week. I talked about it in the midweek moment this week. But I love that moment where the guy sees this woman for the first time and his response is, at last. He has a perfect companion, somebody to share his time with. And finally, the creation that God had made was very good indeed. It's absolutely beautiful. This first creation of man and woman, they lived a life that we can never understand. Everything was exactly the way that was in the midst of God's plan. There was no pain, there was no misery, there was no responsibility, there was no stresses, right down to the fact that man and woman lived completely naked. So the next time your pants don't fit you quite right, just remind yourself this was never part of God's plan in the first place. But for the man and the woman who would eventually name themselves Adam and Eve, everything about their lives was probably idyllic to us. They had no stress, no worry, no pain, no death, no fear, nowhere to be, nothing to do. The world was literally their playground. They could do anything they want to. And now maybe in our culture, our context, and the way that we grew up and everything like that, we might begin to wonder, how do you not get bored? Right? I mean, if you don't have anything to do, I don't know about you, but for a while I tend to get kind of stir crazy. I need to find something to do. Right? But again, remember, Adam and Eve had the entire world to themselves. They could go exploring. They could do whatever they wanted to. They were truly free. God only had one rule for them. One single solitary rule, one that we looked at last week, where it says in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for on the day that you do, you will certainly die. That's it. One rule. Imagine how freeing that is. There's one rule, and that rule is super easy to follow. Right? Don't eat from that tree. You can eat from all the other trees, just not that one. If you really think about that, there's a lot of trees. Right? We're talking billions. And this is before people started cutting them down, so maybe hundreds of billions at this particular time period. And they can eat the fruit from any single one of them. Just avoid one. You want to go swim with the dolphins? Go swim with the dolphins. You want to go hug a koala bear? Go hug a koala bear. You want to swing on vines like Tarzan? Knock yourself out, man. Well, actually, you can't knock yourself out. There's no pain at this point in time. So go have fun. Just don't eat from that tree. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? I'm not so sure it is. See, there's something about human nature that if you tell us something that we can't do, we're going to be a little curious about that thing, right? Like if I had a plate of brownies sitting right here, and it was just packed full of them, and I told you, you can have as many brownies as you want, just don't eat that one. What are you going to say? I'm betting you're probably not going to say, oh man, look at how many brownies I can have. You're going to say, well, why can't I have that one? There's like natural curiosity that when we're told we can't do something, we kind of want to know why. And so I have to think that maybe Adam and Eve, they were curious. Maybe they were too busy. Maybe they were all kinds of crazy busy and all this other stuff. So maybe they didn't even think about it. Maybe they just went around and did their own thing. But I don't know. So man and woman, they're enjoying themselves through all of creation. God is watching on them. And I got to think that God, as he's watching them explore this creation, as he's watching the most personal of all his creations explore the rest of his creation, God's got to be grinning from ear to ear, right? As a dad, I loved watching my children play together on the floor and have a good time and laugh and squeal, and sometimes I'd join in and playing with them. I said loved in past tense because now we've reached the age where the only time we'll play is in our bedroom with the door shut, and the minute Dad opens the door, we're upset. but I still love hearing my children play together and laugh. And so I have to imagine that as God watched as this man and woman explored all of his creation, he did so in the way that a father loves to watch his children play. And God had a very personal relationship. A little further down in Genesis 3 than what we're going to be covering today, the text really implies that Adam and Eve understood the sound that God made as he approached them, that they were so tight-knit with God that they could tell when it was him coming near. Wives, you may remember and know the sound of your husband walking in the door better than anybody else in the world. Husbands, you may know the sound of your wife walking throughout the house. God was so tight-knit with humans that when Adam and Eve heard God coming, they knew that it was him. That's pretty tight-knit. One day, Adam and Eve were just kind of hanging out. And all of a sudden, this snake comes up to him. Now, I don't know about you, but if a snake comes up near to me, I'm going to freak out. I'm good with spiders. I'm good with bugs, all that stuff. I'm even good with mice. But a snake? No. But they were totally fine because, again, no pain, no death, no fear. So it's just a snake coming up. And the snake actually talks to them, the snake talked to them. Like a Disney movie. Right? That's an unusual thing. But anyway, the serpent comes up to him. He says what we say, or he asks a question. And we see his question at the end of verse 1. It said, "Did God really say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden?" Now, obviously, this is not the question, or this is not the way that God phrased things. This is not how God said. He's a little confused here. But did you catch the way that he set up that question? Did God really say that? The serpent is questioning what it is that God said. He's asking Adam and Eve, "Are you sure that's what God said?" This whole thing, and you and I both know exactly how the rest of the story plays out. It started with a simple question of, did God really say that? Interesting. Eve probably thought the snake was maybe just a little bit confused. And she was more than happy to set him straight, to tell him exactly what happened. And we see what Eve said in verses 2 and 3. It says, "The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat the fruit from the trees in the garden. But about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it or touch it, or you will die.'" I want to press pause here again, because what I'm about to say, it doesn't really play into anything else that we're going to be talking about this morning, but I want to point something out to you that I find really fascinating, that the more I've read this text, the more I find myself going, wow. There was one rule, right? One. That's it. But did God say that they couldn't touch it? Now, see, because we go back to Genesis 2, verse 16 and 17, the rule that God had was you must not eat the fruit of the garden. He never said anything about touching it. There's one rule, only one. Rules have a tendency sometimes to feel like burdens to us, do they not? You can't do this. Even though you want to do that, you can't do that. That's somewhat burdensome. And yet, there's some part of our human nature that we have a tendency to take that burden that we already get from that one rule, and we make it more. We add on to it. There's one rule, and Adam and Eve decided that rule wasn't enough. So they added to the burden by saying you cannot eat it and you cannot touch it, or you'll die. It's interesting how we have a tendency to do that. But the snake doesn't just hear the rule. He doesn't just hear what she says. In fact, he actually challenges her. Challenges her thinking in verses 4 and 5. The snake has real insight into what will happen if they eat the fruit. He says, "No, you will not die," the serpent said to the woman. "In fact, God knows. When you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." You will be like God. It's quite a interesting thing to consider, is it not? The most powerful being in all of existence, you could become like it if you eat this fruit. The snake has challenged what it was that God said to her. He began this entire conversation by first questioning what it was that God actually said. And now the snake is, in essence, claiming he knows better than God. Now, earlier, I posed this question about whether or not Adam and Eve would ever even go near the tree. Right? I mean, there's one rule: eat from whatever tree you want, just not this one. So logic would tell you, just do everything you can to avoid that tree. And that's not hard to do. You got a whole world to go exploring. Just stay away from that one tree. And here we see the serpent questioning about this tree itself. But there's a little detail that I think we tend to overlook whenever we read this text, whenever we continue reading at the beginning of verse 6. It said, the woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at and desirable for obtaining wisdom. You may not have caught the little detail here, right? There's a chance that maybe Adam and Eve were far away from the tree. Maybe they're up on a hill, and when the snake starts talking to him about the tree, Eve is able to look out and actually see the tree, right? From a distance, she can still see it. That's a chance. But how could she tell that the fruit of it was desirable? How could she look on it and all of a sudden think, yeah, I should eat that? Man, that looks tasty. How could she have said that if she wasn't near the tree to begin with? There's one rule. Don't eat the fruit of this tree, and yet the text implies Adam and Eve were pretty close to it. Right? Kind of like when you're a kid and your mom tells you not to go over here. So you start to test that boundary. You don't actually cross it, but you get awful close to it. Adam and Eve are likely already curious about why that rule is in place. And so maybe they spend a little time just hanging out by the tree, and all of a sudden the serpent comes and plays on their natural curiosity. He starts the whole thing by asking a simple question: did God really say that? But isn't that always the nature of temptation? Isn't that always our nature of human beings? I mean, I don't know what it is about humans. Maybe it's that natural rebellion that we've talked about. Maybe we're just dumb. Like, can we be honest? Maybe we're just dumb. But when we're told plainly, in perfectly clear language, that we cannot do something, or that something is bad for us, we wonder why. We wonder, why is that in place? God was very clear to Adam and Eve that they could have all the fruits from any other tree that they wanted, just don't eat this one. And yet their curiosity was so prevalent that they felt that they needed to at least be around it, to be close to it, to go right up to that line without actually crossing it. And then, even though it was abundantly clear to Adam and Eve what it was, all the snake had to do was ask a simple question of, did God really say that? If we look around us, if we look at the state not just of the world that we live in, but if we look at just the state of the church, isn't this still the same question that we're asking? Time after time, we have a tendency to get so tripped up on what God actually said. We find ourselves asking that question: did God really say that I couldn't do this, or that God really say I couldn't do that? Even though we have, in our possession, most of us have multiples of these, printed Word of God that is clear and understandable, we still find ourselves asking the question, did God really say we couldn't do that? Or did God really say that? Most of the time we get tripped up because of the power of a 5-worded question. We will dissect things, we'll break them down, we'll try to come up with intelligent-sounding arguments when at the heart of things we are questioning what God said to us very plainly. Most of the time when we ask this question, it's rarely because we're curious about it or that we have some theological question related to it. Most of the time we ask this question because we're attracted to the thing that we're not supposed to do. And we're looking for some sort of justification to go ahead and do something we know to be wrong. I've been guilty of that. Of finding myself questioning, well, God didn't word it exactly that way. So I think this is fine. That's not, but this is fine. And we make little tiny compromises, allowing ourselves to be deceived little by little by little, until before we know it, we've known exactly what God told us. We know exactly what the words were, and yet we've done that anyway. All of us in this room are guilty of taking actions against God. Right? We've all staged our own little mini rebellions against God himself. We've done things that we know we should not do. And then what ends up happening, right? We end up in that place of pain and misery and heartache and broken relationships and broken trust and all this other stuff. And then, when we face the natural consequences of our actions, we have the audacity to get angry at God for allowing that to happen. We have the audacity to get angry at God because we chose to violate the rule of God, because we chose to ask, did God really say that? It's kind of like when you were a kid and your mom told you don't touch the stove because the stove is hot. And then you touched the stove and you got burned. And then you got mad at your mom. This is what we do. This is how every rebellious act against God ever starts in our lives, by asking the question, did God really say that? By the time the serpent asked this question, it was probably getting pretty close to too late anyway. Adam and Eve were playing with fire, right? They were right near the tree. I think that if the snake would have asked this question and they were 30 miles away from the tree, this story probably plays out different. But the text implies that they were near the tree because Eve saw the fruit and saw it to be desirable. They were playing with fire, just to be near the source of temptation. Understand, all they had to do to avoid this temptation was walk away from the tree. Most of the time for us, the best way for us to avoid temptation is to do the simplest thing possible and leave. Put space between us and the source of that temptation. Get some distance between the thing that causes us to violate the law of God. Get some distance from the thing that causes us to ask those 5 words of, did God really say that? Maybe for some of you, at night you need to put your cell phone in another room. Maybe you need to turn your computer off and walk away from the office. Maybe you need to take a different route home. But it's amazing the kind of temptation that we can avoid if we just put simple distance between that temptation and us. Had Adam and Eve had done that, the entirety of human history would be different. The problem is that we like being close to the tree. We like playing with fire. We like to be near the source of that temptation. We like our rebellion. All it takes for us to dive headfirst into things that we know we shouldn't is 5 simple words. Did God really say that? The snake asked it in Genesis 3. We've been asking it ever since. Did God really say that?